So the first part is about the trained driver directive. I suppose most of this is, of course, known, but nevertheless, maybe it's good to get back to the details so that we are aware about this. 2007, I mentioned already, was the introduction of the scheme, and the main purpose was to define a certification scheme with the roles and responsibilities in the scheme, the conditions, of course, and requirements to get a license, and it's about procedures and registers. There is a consolidated text as well available. You can get this via the slide, which you will receive probably later on, so the consolidated text includes all the changes which were done meanwhile. This is a rough summary of the scheme, the model. So we have a license on the one hand, which is submitted by the national authority. And on the other hand, we have a complementary certificate, which is submitted by the company, so the company for which the trained driver is working. Both elements have different character and content. The license stands for some minimum requirements, which is the minimum age, the minimum pre-education you need to become a trained driver. It's about fitness criteria in regard to medical fitness and psychological fitness. And then there is a small part which is the general competence, but this is very basic. We will come to this later on, I guess. The certificate nowadays is the most important part of the certification scheme, because here the competences which are required in the daily life of a trained driver, I would say, are registered. So it is about the competence on the rolling stock, so the engine the driver is allowed to drive. It is about the infrastructure he's allowed to use, so the lines. And it is about language, in case that the driver needs to work in different language areas. And then there are categories A and B. It's shunting and normal driving. The validity, so not in duration, but in regard to the geographical scope, is different, because the license is a European document which is valid throughout the European Union in all member states. And on the other hand, the certificate is only valid on the network which is defined on the certificate. So this is not can't be used in general. This is logical because up to now we are not that far in the harmonization of operational and technical features of the infrastructure. So usually the trained driver, of course, needs to be trained on a specific set of technical and operational features which refer to the lines where he's going to drive the train. The license, there are certain requirements, which is the minimum age, 20 years. There is an exception, but this is not that important. There are minimum pre-education requirements, fitness, the psychological testing, and the general competences. 10 years is the validity. So after 10 years, you need to replace the trained driver directive, the trained driver license. You need to apply for a new one at the NSA. The ownership is legally an important element here. So the ownership here is with the trained driver itself. So the trained driver, when leaving the company, takes this license with him and can start a new job with another company. The certificate, as I said, there are the the professional competences registered on it. There are lines. It's a bit old-fashioned, meanwhile, because I think now with the increasing digitalization, nobody would invent such a model anymore, where you write down the information about the competences. You would use probably technical devices, but the model at the moment foresees that you have a paper where it is described which lines the driver is allowed to drive, or where he was trained to drive, and which engines he was educated. Also, language could be mentioned on this certificate. The validity different to the validity of the license is not limited, so there's no number of years, but there are requirements which are connected to the validity, which is the succeeding of frequent competence checks every 3 years. And in addition, after an absence, so if the driver is not working for at least 1 year, he needs to repeat some checks as well before he's going to start again. The train directive foresees also a number of responsibilities and tasks, mainly to the National Safety Authority and to the employer for whom the train driver is working. So the National Safety Authority is issuing the license. So the authority is responsible to set up a procedure how the license can be applied for, and what are the technical steps. Nowadays, a lot of NSAs have internet-based application procedures. So the applicant train driver can submit the application via the internet. This alternative, they offer also the possibility to just to submit papers in a classical way. It's about suspending and withdrawing the license, of course, under certain conditions, if the requirements are not anymore fulfilled. If there are doubts that the person who has the license is really able to operate safely, then of course it is required to suspend or even withdraw the license. What is also important is the whole set of recognition. So there are several bodies, several roles where recognition is required. And this recognition is performed by the NSA as well. The NSA holds the register of the licenses, of course, because they are issuing them. They monitor the process. That means they should supervise the whole system as it affects their territorium, and perform also inspections. This refers mainly to the recognized persons or bodies. So they, from time to time, they should check, for example, training centers, which they recognized if they still work properly and if everything moves smoothly. So this was a side of the national authority. Then there is another side of responsibilities, and this is with the employer. So the railway undertaking or the infrastructure manager, both can be, of course, employer of train drivers. They are responsible for the certificate. So they issue and update certificates. And as they do this, they also need to hold the respective register on the certificates. They monitor their own drivers, and they are responsible for the competence management of their drivers, which includes also frequent checks of the medical conditions. Here you see also a small symbol, the symbol for the safety management system. So this circle is a symbol or includes all the elements of the SMS published on our website, and it summarizes the the content of the safety management system, and it is put here because the competence management is, of course, a very important element of the safety management system. And this way, there is a connection between the train driver directive and the SMS requirements, as everything the employer does in regards to train driver certification is also automatically a matter for organizing the safety management system. It must be implemented in their company safety management system. We will now spend some words on the topic of recognition. If I go back to this picture, where the different elements of license and complementary certificate were mentioned, I now marked with a red frame the elements which require recognition. So this is everything which refers to the competence of train drivers, because competence means always you need to train someone, and you need to examine at the end of the training if the training was successful, if the applicant is competent. For this purpose, the Commission approved a decision. It's a decision 2011-765, so it's already also 11 years or 12 years old. And it's about the criteria for the recognition of training centers, the criteria for the recognition of examiners, and criteria for the organization of examinations. The recognition of training centers, which is maybe of particular importance for your project to establish a training center. There are different criteria, of course, and requirements. Overall, there is the requirement of independence and impartiality. This is, of course, essential that every applicant needs to be treated the same way. And this is in particular important where training centers belong to railway undertakings, which in practice happens quite often, of course, that companies have their own training centers, at least the bigger ones. We see it in Europe more and more that even small companies just establish training facilities as a separate business column, let's say. So it's not that only the big companies have the resources for this and offer this to the rail public in their surrounding. It's also a model to start with or to combine with other specific operational purposes of a company. And here it is, of course, important that it is ensured that not only the staff members of this particular company who has the ownership of these training centers are better treated than others, or that they try to push them through the examinations while others are just cows to milk, so that they spend many hours in the trainings. And yeah. More important probably is what is required in regard to competences. And here, of course, most of the elements are logical, and everyone would expect this if they think about what is required to establish a training center. Of course, you need staff. You need staff to organize, to perform the training. Staff means trainers, but also administrative staff. You need the facilities, you need rooms if it's online. You need maybe also the computers and the technique for this. You need equipment and accommodation. Probably it can depends if it's centralized. You have rooms for the training, but maybe also rooms where people can stay for a week, or however how long it takes. You need competent trainers in particular. which have the qualification and experience which is necessary for the training task they are performing. There is one specific requirement defined in this decision, which refers to the practical training. So train driver, of course, they have theoretical training, classroom training, or online training, or maybe also self-training by IT tools, which is very often the case now as one part of the training. But also at the end, at a certain moment, you need to have practical training, because this is an essential element, minimum requirement, that every train driver, before starting really its job, he needs, of course, to have a practical experience of train drivers under supervision of trainers. And for this training in particular, the decision says the trainer must have a valid license, especially, of course, which covers the content of the training. So practical training always, of course, refers to a specific engine, to a specific line where this takes place. And the trainer needs, of course, to have a license for these elements, to ensure that also for movements as part of practical training, there is a competent train driver on board. This is the idea. And in the decision, it was decided to require that this experience must have a length of at least 3 years. This is very precise, while the other requirements are less precise and more general. For example, appropriate methodology. Of course, it must be clear that an entity who would like to become a training center needs to show that they have the pedagogical knowledge on board to establish training courses and programs and so on. There must be a documentation of everything which is done, so about participants and trainers and courses and duration and results and whatever. A quality management system is also required, ongoing training. So you need to keep the system updated. This is maybe the element here. This refers to the trainers. So the trainers, once they work for the training center, they need still to stay updated with the developments, and have themselves also updating trainings, for example. It's not that banal as it is maybe in the first moment that you, but after maybe 5 or 10 years, a trainer is working for a training center. Of course, he is not that close anymore to the operation, and it could be that he misses some amendments which took place. Here, a lot of training centers, at least if they cooperate closely with one or more companies, and at least, or if they are part of a railway undertaking, it's often organized in a way that trainers not only work for the training department or entity of the company, but also partly as train drivers themselves or in other related areas, so that automatically they are updated. This is very common and also, of course, useful. The last element of this decision, there is a special provision for training centers who belong to companies in regard to the safety certification of the company. So there is a formal facilitation possible if a railway company would like also to offer trainings and to be recognized as a training center. They can apply for this recognition already in the frame of the application of the safety certificate. So there's a specific box you can tick, and then the assessing body, which is the NSA or the agency, we also do this work, will then check the requirements for this training center in frame of the SMS assessment. Good, and the last point is that there are some exceptions in regard to new lines or rolling stock. So every time when there is an upgrade of a line, or if a new rolling stock comes to the market, of course, you don't find people who have 3 years of experience. This is logical. It's not possible. So for these cases, the NSA can establish precise rules on their own, which should then, of course, meet the hazards which are linked to this situation, and to foresee mitigating measures which are useful. Okay, this was a training centers. Formally, it's separate to the question of examiners. Although in practice, of course, training centers also perform examinations at the end, but it must be separated organizationally to ensure also impartiality. So, for example, the trainer should not be in person the same as the examiner, so that he does not examine the outcome of his own trainings. This should be avoided. Of course, also examiners need to be independent and impartial. And here we have also a number of requirements. First of all, about the practical experience, 4 years within 5 years before the application. So at the moment, the person applies for an examiner, then you have to look on his work experience or practice in the 5 years before, and within this 5 years, 4 of them needs to refer to the topic he is applying for to be examiner. This refers in parallel to practical examinations. Here it's about the license. So the 5 years, 4 years rule applies here in the same way. Knowledge must be up to date, of course. Language is an issue if the language, the mother tongue of the examiner and the candidates differs. It's important, of course, that there is a common ground for the communication. Pedagogical skills, attitudes, and no relevant examination. So usually there is a specific training, of course, required for being an examiner. There are specific methods and yeah, there's a specific knowledge which needs to be there and needs to be checked also in course of the recognition of this person. Good, and demonstrate how professional competences will be updated. This is important because we have other with the trainers. We have seldom in Europe independent trainers which work on their own as an own business, and they are mostly part of a training center. So there, the question of updating competences is a topic of the organization of the training center, and here it's about quality management and so on. But in case of examiner, we see a lot of cases where people work independently. They just offer their competence as examiner and work then, yes, for other entities. And in this case, it is much more difficult for a single person to demonstrate how they ensure that professional competences are still up to date. That's why it is mentioned here separately. And as an NSA, you always need to consider what are the appropriate documents to accept for the recognition, which can show that the professional competences are still are regularly updated. The second part of recognition refers to the medical and psychological examinations. Here also the NSA is responsible to recognize these entities. However, the train driver directive does not foresee or does not describe elements which are considered as appropriate or necessary requirements. And this makes it much more difficult for the NSAs to provide these recognitions. And I saw a lot of cases where the NSAs, in fact, do not the recognition themselves, but they delegate this to other administrative entities, the health ministry, which are more familiar with the topic of fitness. They consider, for example, specialized doctors for work health as competent also for this kind of examination. So the directive itself is silent on this question, which is a challenge for the NSAs. For the psychologists, the same. This provides an overview of some essential documents which were approved in the beginning of the certification implementation. So in the years 2007 to 11, you see there were some important regulations, specifications of the register, for example, on the layout of the license and the certificate, but also, as I just talked about, the recognition of training centers and examiners. There are also some recommendations about the organization, but this can be read. It's not maybe that it's essential that we need to mention this here. You can find all the legislation on our website, of course. Also some reports which were done or studies which were done meanwhile. This is a picture which shows the development. We are, as I've said, this is all in the past. We are now in the comfortable situation that everything is done and works more or less smoothly, beside the weaknesses, which we will talk about probably later on. But in general, it works. So this gives an overview of the timeline. It also shows these green fields should demonstrate the step-by-step implementation. So it was a long way, but now it's done. This shows how different the member states think about financing the system. And you see that some member states, there's still the UK, so the slide is quite old. but interesting is that there are some member states who have a kind of integrated finance system. So it is paid by the taxpayer in general, let's say. So you don't need to pay if you apply for a license. It's a public service. And in other countries, it's different. And some even have rather high fees they take. Usually, in most cases, I would say they follow the approach that administration should be not a business, so it's a kind of self-cost base calculation. This is about one specific question. It's the smart card, and if we look in the future, probably we will come to this again. But this was already a question in the years 2011 and 12, where a study was done on the question if it is possible to combine at that moment already the question of certificates with a license by integrating a chip on the license, so that you don't need anymore these paper documents. This was analyzed deeply, especially, of course, in regard to the cost and benefit effects. And there are, of course, some obvious benefits. You don't need the certificate anymore, which means you don't need to produce and to update them and to handle them. You need less cards because you can update easily the data. I don't know, this is a rather smaller case, because I think the exchange of licenses due to the change of personal data is quite seldom. Now, higher reliability, easier control, yes. These are the points, and then there are, of course, obstacles as well. And the biggest one was probably that at that moment, and it's still the case, the way the competences on rolling stock and infrastructure, so what is on the certificate, is not harmonized. So every country has their own idea, more or less, to define the competences, what to write down, how the lines are described. Sometimes there is a system of figures. So I don't know, you probably heard about RINF, so the Railway Infrastructure Register, the European one, which is still in development. And this, of course, would, at the final stage, then allow to have a harmonized system of how to describe lines. So they all have then individual numbers or identification codes. At this moment, it was not the case. So every country has different approaches here, which is an obstacle to have a harmonized data collection scheme for the license here. The biggest obstacle, and which led also at the end to the decision that the change to a smart card was not approved, was the cost side. So it was very costly at the time to do this change, and that's why it was not accepted. If you are interested in this question, you can also find the report on our website in this list.